Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. The extra bed.
As I pulled into the parking lot of the quaint hotel, a sense of excitement washed over me. This place had an old-world charm, with its ivy-covered brick exterior and vintage signage. I was looking forward to a weekend of relaxation, away from the chaos of my daily life. The warm glow of the lights from the lobby welcomed me as I stepped out of my car, stretching my legs after the long drive. The receptionist greeted me with a friendly smile, her name tag reading Linda. She was a bit distracted, fumbling with the computer as she checked me in, but her voice was soothing. "Welcome. Here's your key. You're in room 204. Enjoy your stay." I took the brass key with a sense of anticipation and made my way down the dimly lit hallway. The carpet felt soft beneath my feet, muffling my steps as I walked toward my room. I could hear the distant sound of water running from a nearby bathroom and the faint hum of an old air conditioning unit. When I finally opened the door to my room, I was taken aback by the cozy atmosphere. The walls were painted a calming shade of blue, and the bed looked inviting with its fluffy white comforter. But something caught my eye: a second bed. It was neatly made, the linens crisp and white, as if waiting for a guest who would never arrive. I frowned, momentarily confused. Had I booked a room with 2 beds? I hadn't intended to share my space with anyone. A quick glance around confirmed that I was alone. The room felt too empty, too quiet. Curiosity prickled at my mind, so I picked up the phone on the bedside table and dialed the front desk. "Hello, this is Linda," she answered cheerfully. "Hi, it's me in room 204. I just wanted to ask about the extra bed in my room. Was there a mix-up with my reservation?" There was a brief pause before Linda replied, her tone shifting to one of confusion. "Extra bed? There shouldn't be anyone else in that room. Let me check." I waited, tapping my fingers anxiously on the nightstand. After a moment, she returned to the line, her voice low and hesitant. "I don't see any record of another guest. Just ignore it. Sometimes the staff prepares the room for multiple guests and forgets to remove the extra bed. You'll be fine." "Okay, thanks," I replied, though I still felt a twinge of unease. Hanging up, I took one last look at the bed beside mine. It was so perfectly made, and a sense of dread settled over me. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping feeling. It was just a hotel, nothing to be scared of. As night fell, I settled into my own bed, pulling the covers tightly around me. I tried to shake off the nagging thoughts about the extra bed, convincing myself it was just a harmless oversight. But as I drifted into sleep, the feeling of being watched clung to me, like a shadow lurking just beyond my awareness. The sound of silence enveloped me as I fell into a restless sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind unable to shake the unsettling feeling of being in that room. Each creak of the building felt amplified in the stillness, echoing off the walls like whispers of some unseen presence. Around midnight, I jolted awake, the feeling of something off causing my heart to race. I lay there, listening intently, when I heard it, a soft sound, as if someone had sat down on the edge of the extra bed. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I turned my head slowly, my breath hitching in my throat. The dim light from the bedside lamp barely illuminated the room, casting long shadows that seemed to flicker and dance with the slightest movement. I squinted into the darkness, but all I could see was the outline of the empty bed. The breathing sound continued, slow and steady, but it wasn't my own. My instincts screamed for me to scream or run, but I felt frozen, trapped beneath the weight of fear. I strained my ears, trying to discern the source of the sound. It was almost rhythmic, like a lullaby, yet terrifying in its familiarity. Each breath seemed to echo, filling the air with a tension that felt tangible. "Just my imagination," I whispered to myself, though my voice trembled in the silence. I closed my eyes tightly, willing myself to go back to sleep, but the oppressive feeling in the room only intensified. Then, without warning, the sound of breathing shifted. It grew deeper, more pronounced, as if someone was drawing nearer. Panic clawed at my throat. I cracked my eyes open again and glanced over at the extra bed. The dark shape seemed to shift, but my mind refused to comprehend what I was seeing. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table, my fingers trembling as I fumbled to turn on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the extra bed. For a moment, I saw nothing unusual, just the neatly made sheets. But the sense of dread was palpable, and I could feel my heart racing faster than ever. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Just the sound of my own breathing, which now felt too loud in the oppressive quiet. I shifted in my bed, trying to convince myself that it was just my overactive imagination. But then the breathing resumed, louder and more insistent. With every breath, it felt as if something was encroaching on my space, invading my comfort. I could almost feel the weight of someone sitting beside me, the mattress dipping as if under the pressure of an unseen presence. I took a deep breath, ready to confront whatever was happening. "Who's there?" I demanded, but the words came out barely above a whisper. Just then, the figure shifted again, and I felt a chill rush down my spine. It was no longer just an extra bed. It felt like a threat, like someone waiting in the shadows, ready to claim me. My instincts kicked in, and I knew I had to get out of that room. But as I swung my legs over the side of my bed, a primal fear rooted me in place, holding me back as the breathing grew louder, more chaotic, filling the room with an unsettling dread. I felt like I was stuck in a nightmare, a loop of fear that I couldn't escape. Each breath from the unseen presence next to me sent chills coursing through my body. My heart raced as I forced myself to stand, gripping the edge of the bed for support. The dim light flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. I had to get out. I needed to escape. I turned toward the door, but a feeling of unease washed over me as I realized the hallway would be just as dark and silent. I hesitated, unsure if I could face whatever lurked beyond the door. As I took a step toward it, the breathing stopped. A heavy silence enveloped the room, thickening the air around me. I felt a cold draft brush against my skin, and I froze, suddenly acutely aware of the shadows in the corners of the room. They felt alive, like they were watching me, waiting for me to make a move. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling as I turned it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing the darkened hallway beyond. I peered out, expecting to see someone, or something, but the corridor was empty, shrouded in darkness. Gathering my courage, I stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind me with a soft click. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked left and right, searching for an escape. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead buzzed ominously, casting strange shadows that played tricks on my mind. I took a step forward, hoping to find a way out of this nightmare. But as I walked down the corridor, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread that seemed to cling to me like a fog. It was as if the hotel itself were conspiring against me, pulling me back to my room. I could almost hear the whispers of the walls, urging me to return. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the end of the hallway and found the staircase. I rushed down the steps, each creak of the wooden stairs echoing in the stillness. As I descended, a cold breeze whipped through the stairwell, sending shivers down my spine. I paused, glancing back up the stairs, half expecting to see someone staring back at me from the top. But there was nothing. Just the empty staircase, stretching back into darkness. I shook my head, trying to push the panic away. "You're just being paranoid," I muttered to myself, moving faster down the stairs. When I reached the ground floor, the lobby was dimly lit, and I felt a brief sense of relief. I approached the reception desk, where Linda was still seated, her eyes glued to the screen. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" She looked up, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated, unsure of how to explain what had just happened. I think there's something wrong with my room. I need to change rooms or leave the hotel." Linda frowned, glancing at the computer screen. "But you just checked in. Is it really that bad?" I took a deep breath, recalling the breathing, the feeling of being watched. "I can't explain it. Just please, let me change rooms." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she was weighing her options. After a moment, she nodded. "Okay, let me see what I can do." I stood there, anxiety pooling in my stomach, glancing around the lobby. The shadows felt heavier now, as if they were stretching toward me, hungry for my fear. I knew I had to get away from the extra bed, away from whatever had been lying next to me. As Linda began typing away at her computer, the lights flickered again, plunging the lobby into darkness for a split second. I gasped, my heart racing. When the lights returned, I saw a shadow darting across the far wall, and my breath caught in my throat. "Did you see that?" I blurted out, my voice trembling. Linda looked up, confused. "See what?" But when I turned to point, there was nothing there, just the empty wall, devoid of any sign of life. The weight of dread settled back onto my shoulders as I realized I was still trapped in this nightmare, no matter where I turned. The relief I'd felt upon reaching the lobby began to fade as I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest. Linda's fingers flew over the keyboard, but I could barely concentrate on what she was saying. The feeling of being watched had returned, more intense than ever, like a shroud of cold air enveloping me. I glanced around the lobby, searching for signs of movement in the shadows, but the room was still. Just as I was about to reassure myself that everything was fine, I heard it, a soft whisper, almost indistinguishable from the low hum of the lobby lights. "Leave." I froze, the words sending a chill down my spine. I turned to Linda, who was still typing, oblivious to the creeping terror that had wrapped around me. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Hear what?" she replied, not looking up from her screen. "Someone just whispered," I stammered, scanning the corners of the room again. "I think there's something wrong here." Linda finally looked up, her expression a mixture of concern and annoyance. "It's probably just your imagination. It can be overwhelming staying in a hotel alone at night." I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could, the lights flickered again, and the whispering grew louder, swirling around me like a sinister wind. "Get out now." My breath quickened as panic surged through me. "I need to change rooms. Please, just find me another one," I pleaded, my voice rising. All right," she said, her tone softening. "Let me see if I can find something available." As she began typing again, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. The chill wrapped around me, and I shivered uncontrollably. It was as if the shadows themselves were closing in, whispering secrets I couldn't comprehend. I needed to escape, to find safety away from that cursed room. Suddenly, Linda looked up with an expression that sent my heart plummeting. It seems we're fully booked. I can't find another room for you," she said, her voice laced with uncertainty. "What do you mean you can't find another room?" I said, my voice trembling. "You have to have something available." She shook her head, her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry. I can check again, but I really don't think." Before she could finish, the lights flickered one last time, plunging us into darkness. In that moment, I felt a presence behind me. It was as if someone or something was hovering just out of sight, breathing down my neck. I turned sharply, but the lobby was empty. My pulse raced, panic clawing at my throat. I felt like I was losing control, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. As the lights flickered back on, I caught a glimpse of something moving in my peripheral vision. I spun around, heart pounding, only to find a reflection of myself in the polished surface of the reception desk. But my reflection wasn't alone. Standing right beside me was a dark figure, blurred and indistinct, like a smudge on the glass. I gasped, stumbling backward. "What is happening?" I cried out, and Linda stepped back, her eyes wide in shock. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "No. Did you see that?" I exclaimed, pointing at the desk, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. "See what?" Linda asked, bewildered. "There was something right next to me. Something dark." I was nearly in tears, feeling the weight of despair and terror closing in around me. Linda shook her head, her expression shifting from concern to confusion. "Maybe you need to take a moment to breathe. I'll try to see if I can contact someone from housekeeping to check on your room." I nodded, feeling a mix of desperation and dread. I took a step back, glancing around the lobby once more, feeling the shadows stretching towards me. "Please hurry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. As Linda resumed her work, I stood there, clutching the edge of the reception desk, trying to steady my racing heart. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind. "Get out now." But where would I go? I felt trapped, ensnared in a web of fear and darkness, unsure of how to escape the sinister grip of the hotel that felt more like a living nightmare. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was lurking in the shadows was watching me, waiting for the moment I would falter. And in that moment, I realized that the hotel itself had become a maze, and I was its prey. I stood frozen, the reality of my situation settling in like a heavy fog. The lobby felt like a cage, the shadows stretching and twisting around me, threatening to swallow me whole. I tried to remain calm, but panic gnawed at my insides as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Leave. Now." Linda continued to type furiously, but the intensity of my fear drowned out any hope I had of focusing on her words. I glanced at the exits, my mind racing with possibilities. I had to get out of this hotel, out of this nightmare, but every direction felt wrong, every step a descent deeper into madness. Then, just as my anxiety reached a breaking point, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway behind me. They were slow, deliberate, and each footfall sent a jolt of terror through my body. I whipped around, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the darkness, but the hallway was empty. "Did you hear that?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. Linda looked up again, confusion etched on her face. Hear what? The footsteps. There's someone else here. I could feel the dread pooling in my stomach. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the lights flickered ominously again, plunging us into momentary darkness. My heart raced as I grasped the edge of the reception desk, grounding myself against the encroaching fear. When the lights returned, a shiver ran down my spine. In the corner of the lobby stood a tall figure, cloaked in shadow, watching me with an intensity that sent my pulse racing. I felt my breath hitch in my throat, the weight of its gaze pressing down on me. "Leave." The voice echoed in my head, a chilling command that resonated through my very being. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned to Linda, desperation clawing at my throat. "I have to get out of here. Please, help me." She seemed frozen, staring at the figure, her face pale. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just let me out. There has to be a back exit or something." I pleaded, my heart racing as I felt the figure move closer, the air growing heavy with dread. Linda finally snapped out of her trance, her eyes wide with fear. "Okay, there's a service exit in the back. Follow me." Without waiting for her to lead the way, I bolted toward the back of the lobby, my footsteps echoing against the tile floor. As I rushed past Linda, I glanced back at the figure, now moving with an eerie fluidity, closing the distance between us. I could hear the whispers again, louder, overlapping, an incoherent symphony of dread. "You can't escape. Stay with us." Panic surged within me. "Hurry!" I shouted, nearly tripping over my own feet as I darted toward the service door. Linda opened the door, and I rushed through, my heart pounding in my ears. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, and I could feel the air shift as the presence followed me, relentless and suffocating. "Where do we go?" I gasped, looking back at Linda, who was glancing nervously down the corridor. "Just keep running," she urged, her voice shaking as we sprinted down the narrow passageway. I could feel the shadows closing in, like a dark mist creeping along the walls, eager to consume me. We reached a set of stairs that spiraled down into darkness. With no other choice, I took a deep breath and bolted down the steps, Linda close behind. Each footfall echoed ominously, amplifying my fear. At the bottom, we stumbled into a dimly lit basement. The air was stale, filled with the scent of dampness and decay. I turned to Linda, desperate. "What now?" "There should be an emergency exit somewhere," she exclaimed, scanning the room. Before I could respond, the temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath clouding in front of me. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, drowning out everything else. "Stay with us." I felt the presence behind me, a suffocating darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly. "No!" I screamed, spinning around to face it, ready to confront whatever nightmare had been haunting me. But what I saw made my blood run cold. The figure, now clearly visible, was a grotesque distortion of a person, its features twisted and wrong. Its mouth stretched into a horrifying grin, filled with shadow rather than flesh. "Join us," it hissed, the voice a sickening blend of laughter and malice. Without thinking, I turned and ran toward a flickering light at the far end of the basement. "This way!" I yelled to Linda, who was right behind me. We burst through a door, and suddenly we were outside, the night air hitting us like a wave of relief. We stumbled onto a back alley, the hotel looming behind us like a giant, malevolent beast. But as we caught our breath, the shadows at the edge of the alley began to twist and writhe, drawing closer. The whispers returned, now a cacophony of voices calling out, begging me to return. "Run!" I shouted, dragging Linda with me as we sprinted down the alley, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until we reached the main street, the lights and sounds of the city enveloping us like a protective barrier. We halted at a nearby diner, gasping for air, adrenaline coursing through our veins. As we leaned against the cool metal of the diner, I glanced back toward the hotel, the darkness still lingering, watching us from the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside that hotel would always be waiting, always watching. But for now, I was free. I had escaped the nightmare, but the memories of that night would haunt me forever. I knew one thing for certain: I would never set foot in that hotel again.
Reception calls.
I'd checked into countless hotels over the years. Business travel was practically my lifestyle, so I knew the routine. But something about this hotel was off from the moment I stepped through the doors. The place had an eerie, worn charm. Dark wooden walls lined the lobby, the dim lighting casting shadows that clung to the corners. The receptionist barely looked at me as she handed over my key, a real key, not one of those plastic cards I was used to. Room 409. As I took the elevator up, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crept over me. Maybe it was the stale, musty smell, or how the place felt too quiet, like it hadn't seen many guests in years. The carpeted hallway leading to my room stretched out with flickering lights above, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard footsteps echoing behind me. When I glanced over my shoulder, the corridor was empty. Inside my room, the uneasiness grew. It was a typical old hotel room: faded wallpaper, a creaky bed, and an ancient TV that buzzed faintly even when turned off. I threw my bags down and tried to settle in, blaming my nerves on the fatigue of a long day. But that night, just as I was drifting off, the phone on the bedside table rang sharply, slicing through the silence. I jolted awake, disoriented, and reached for the phone. "Hello." My voice came out groggy, my mind still half asleep. There was a pause on the other end, then a crackling, distorted voice. "You need to leave the room immediately." The voice was cold, robotic almost, with an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're not safe here." My hand tightened around the receiver. Who is this?" I managed to stammer, but there was only silence. And then a click. The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Who would call me in the middle of the night like that? Maybe it was a prank, a sick joke from some bored guest, or maybe even someone at the front desk with a dark sense of humor. I hung up, my heart pounding, and lay back down, but the calm never came. Every sound outside my door seemed amplified: the faint creak of floorboards, the hum of the air conditioner, and it felt like someone or something was standing just beyond the door. I barely slept that night. The words kept repeating in my head, over and over, "You're not safe here." The next morning, I went down to the lobby, hoping daylight might ease the chill that had settled over me. The receptionist from the night before was still there, her expression blank as ever. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity, and maybe a bit of fear, pushed me forward. "Hi," I started, clearing my throat. "I got a strange call last night. Someone told me I should, leave the room immediately." She looked up at me, her brow furrowing slightly, but there was something evasive in her eyes, like she knew exactly what I was talking about but didn't want to acknowledge it. "No one from the desk made any calls to your room," she replied curtly, as if dismissing me would make me go away. Maybe it was an outside line. I felt my stomach twist. An outside line. At 2 in the morning? And how would they know my room number? She shrugged, her gaze already drifting back to her computer screen. It was clear I wasn't going to get anything useful out of her, so I just nodded and headed toward the breakfast area, still feeling like something was lurking just beyond my understanding. As I picked up a cup of coffee, I noticed other odd details around the lobby. Small things that made my skin prickle. One of the framed photos on the wall was tilted, not just slightly, but as if someone had violently twisted it and left it that way. The front desk bell had a dark stain on it that looked too much like dried blood. And then there was the faint smell, almost sour, that seemed to come and go, like something decaying. After a restless day of meetings, I found myself dreading the night. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that I was exhausted, and that everything would be fine once I got a decent night's sleep. But when I returned to my room, a strange feeling settled over me again. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, as if the walls themselves had eyes. As the hours ticked by, I lay in bed, drifting in and out of an uneasy sleep, until, ring. I shot up, heart pounding as the phone blared in the darkness. It was the same exact time as the night before. With trembling fingers, I picked up the receiver, my voice barely a whisper. "Hello." The same distorted voice crackled through the line, but this time it wasn't just a warning. "You need to leave now," it hissed. And then, after a brief, shuddering pause, the voice added, "You're not alone." My stomach dropped. I could feel the color drain from my face as a chill settled deep into my bones. I managed to stammer, Who are you?" But there was no answer, just static, before the line went dead again. I slowly put the phone down, my hands shaking. This wasn't a prank. It couldn't be. Whoever was calling knew something I didn't, and the growing dread gnawed at me like a poison. Lying back down, I stared into the darkness, every shadow on the wall seeming to twist and move, like fingers reaching toward me. And I was left with a single horrifying thought repeating in my mind, over and over. I am not alone. I could hardly focus the next day. I kept running through every detail of the last 2 nights, feeling like I was slipping into some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The receptionist barely made eye contact when I passed her in the lobby, and I noticed a few other hotel staff, all avoiding my gaze as though they knew something I didn't. The entire place had a shadow hanging over it, like it was holding its breath. That night, I couldn't bear the thought of lying in that bed, waiting for the phone to ring again. I decided to do something, anything, to get answers, or at least reassure myself that I wasn't going crazy. I'd go down to the lobby and confront the receptionist directly, force her to tell me who was calling. Or maybe I'd search the halls myself, see if I could hear or see something that explained all of this. The hallway seemed darker than usual as I made my way to the elevator, and my footsteps echoed unervingly in the silence. I could almost feel eyes on me as I walked, the unsettling sense that someone, or something, was just out of sight. When the elevator doors finally slid open, I froze. The lobby, which had been warmly lit earlier in the day, was now bathed in shadow. Only the faint glow from a desk lamp behind the counter cut through the darkness. But the receptionist wasn't there. I leaned over the counter, peering into the back office, hoping to see a sign of life. Nothing. The place was deserted. "Hello," I called out, my voice breaking the silence. A low hum filled the air, so faint I might have imagined it. But then I realized it was coming from the old phone on the counter, as if the receiver had just been placed back on the hook. My heart hammered as I moved closer to the desk, my fingers grazing the cold metal. I reached down to pick up the receiver, and the hum stopped abruptly. It was dead. Swallowing hard, I turned and looked around the lobby, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. That's when I noticed it. Down one of the corridors, near a set of emergency stairs, there was a door I hadn't noticed before. It was unmarked, out of place. Something about it tugged at me, as if it held a secret that explained everything that had been happening. Without really thinking, I walked toward it. My hands were trembling as I gripped the handle, but before I could twist it open, a faint, distorted voice drifted through the silence, echoing from somewhere in the darkened hallway behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, my pulse racing, but there was no one in sight. Just the faint echoes of my own breathing. Ignoring the warning, I yanked the door open. A narrow, spiral staircase wound down, disappearing into pitch blackness. The air here was stale, heavy with an unfamiliar metallic scent that reminded me of rust, or something far worse. I hesitated for a second, but something compelled me to step forward. Each creak of the stairs echoed loudly, magnifying the silence pressing in from all sides. Halfway down, I thought I heard faint footsteps behind me, mirroring my own, but every time I stopped, the sound stopped too. My heart pounded as I continued, every nerve on edge. At the bottom of the staircase, I came to a small room, empty, but with an old rotary phone on the floor in the center. Its receiver was off the hook, dangling by the cord. Suddenly, the phone emitted a high-pitched ring that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It was deafening in the confined space. I felt myself frozen, my body refusing to respond as I stared at it, my mind screaming at me to run. But my hand moved on its own, lifting the receiver. I held it to my ear, barely breathing as the line crackled and that familiar voice, now painfully close, whispered, "They know where you are. You should have left." And then the line went dead. I don't know how I made it back to my room. My hands were still shaking as I locked the door behind me, pressing my back against it, trying to catch my breath. The events of the night felt unreal, but the lingering chill in my bones told me it was anything but a dream. There was no way I'd imagined that basement, the staircase, the phone, or the voice. The silence of the room felt oppressive, almost alive, as if it were closing in around me. I kept glancing at the phone on the nightstand, dreading the thought of it ringing again. I wanted to pack my things and run out of this place, but something held me back, a terrifying curiosity, or maybe it was the certainty that whatever was happening would only follow me. Around 2 a.m., just when I thought I might drift off, I heard it, the faintest creak of a floorboard outside my door. My eyes shot open, heart pounding in my chest. Holding my breath, I listened as the sound grew louder, slowly moving down the hall. It was subtle, deliberate, like someone was trying not to be heard but was close enough that each step was unmistakable. I forced myself to get out of bed and tiptoed over to the door, pressing my eye against the peephole. My stomach turned as I peered into the dimly lit hallway, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. Only shadows and silence. Then, just as I was about to pull away, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Something shifted in the hallway, a dark figure at the end of the corridor, barely visible in the shadows. It was tall, unnaturally thin, and seemed to be facing my direction. I blinked, convinced I was seeing things, but when I looked again, it was still there, closer this time. I backed away from the door, my breath shallow. The footsteps started again, moving slowly down the hall and stopping just outside my door. I froze, watching the shadows under the door as someone, stood just inches away from me. "You didn't leave," a whisper slipped through the door, distorted and guttural, the same voice from the phone calls. A wave of dread washed over me, and I stumbled back, bumping into the nightstand. My hand knocked the receiver off the phone, and it dangled there, swinging slightly. In the silence, the soft static of the line hummed faintly. The voice, now even closer, hissed through the receiver as if it were right beside me. "You invited us in." The words sent a chill down my spine. The door rattled as if someone were pressing against it, testing the lock, and I could feel the air around me grow thick, almost suffocating. I backed toward the window, every instinct screaming for me to get out. I didn't dare look through the peephole again. I knew I didn't want to see whatever was out there. Suddenly, the lights in the room began to flicker, plunging everything into a strobe-like horror show. Each flash revealed glimpses of shadows creeping along the walls, stretching toward me, reaching out with long, spindly fingers. Panicked, I grabbed my suitcase, shoving my things inside as fast as I could. The rattling at the door grew louder, more aggressive, as if something was determined to get in. I had to get out, now. I made a break for the door, throwing it open and stumbling into the hallway. It was empty, eerily quiet, but I didn't care. I sprinted toward the stairs, my footsteps echoing against the walls as I descended. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder, convinced that something was following me, watching me. The hotel was silent, an unsettling calm as if it were holding its breath, waiting. The lobby was empty, the front desk deserted, and even the faint glow of the desk lamp had disappeared, leaving the space draped in shadows. As I reached the front doors, I looked back one last time, my chest heaving. In the darkness of the hallway, near the staircase, I saw the figure standing there, tall, thin, and shrouded in darkness, its head tilted as if it were watching me with empty, hollow eyes. I threw myself out of the hotel and into the night, vowing to never look back. But as I stumbled down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that something from that hotel was still with me. And in the silence, just before I turned the corner, I thought I heard a faint, distorted whisper trailing after me. "You invited us in." I thought I was safe once I left the hotel behind. I found another place across town, a small motel that felt comfortingly run down and unremarkable. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound, certain that at any moment that voice might creep through the walls again. By morning, I felt ridiculous, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But as I got dressed and packed up my few belongings, I couldn't shake the lingering dread that gnawed at me, as if the hotel had left a mark on me, a shadow that refused to fade. Later that day, as I checked out and handed the motel clerk my key, I heard it. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I took it out, hesitating when I saw an unlisted number. I told myself it was just a spam call, probably nothing. But when I held it up to my ear, my heart stopped. Silence. Then, that same distorted, eerie whisper echoed through the receiver. "You left the hotel," it rasped, "but you didn't leave us." I dropped the phone, the line still open as the whispers bled through, warped and crackling with an almost mocking tone. I could hear the faint rustling of static mixed with broken phrases, familiar, chilling words from those nights in the hotel. Heart racing, I grabbed my bag and left the motel without looking back, practically running out into the street. But even as I walked, putting miles between myself and that place, the unease lingered. Every time my phone buzzed in my pocket, I felt that same icy dread, a reminder that whatever had been in that room, that hallway, was still with me. Over the next few days, the calls came at random, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes at midday when I was surrounded by people. No matter where I was, the voice found me. Each call brought a new warning, as if they were watching me. They knew where I was, how far I had gone, and reminded me that I could never escape. One night, exhausted and defeated, I answered the phone and screamed into the receiver, demanding to know what they wanted. But there was no response. Just the sound of faint, disembodied breathing, then the distorted voice saying, "You shouldn't have opened that door." I hung up, trembling, but that was the last call I ever received. Days passed without any signs of them, and slowly, I began to believe it was over. I went back to my life, though I was a shadow of who I had been before staying at that hotel. But deep down, I know I'm never truly alone. Sometimes, in the quiet hours just before dawn, when I'm almost asleep, I think I hear the faintest echo of that voice, whispering in the darkness, reminding me of the door I opened and the shadow I let in. And whenever I stay in a hotel room now, I keep the phone unplugged, because no matter how far I go, I can still feel them watching, waiting, just one call away.
The night without exit.
I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding in my chest. The clock on the nightstand glowed an eerie red, flashing 3 a.m. I blinked against the darkness of my hotel room, feeling an unsettling chill creeping in from somewhere. It was too quiet, too still. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming, caught in a web of anxiety and dread. As I lay there, I noticed that the hum of the air conditioning had stopped. I listened intently, straining to catch any sound, a muffled conversation, a distant laugh, but there was nothing. Just silence, thick and oppressive. It was unsettling enough to make me sit up, the sheets falling away as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. I took a deep breath and decided I needed to get out of the room. Maybe I could grab a snack or something to drink from the vending machine down the hall. I stepped into the hallway, and the flickering lights overhead caught my attention. They buzzed with an unsettling rhythm, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls. As I stepped into the corridor, I felt an odd sensation wash over me, a prickling at the back of my neck as if someone were watching me. I shook it off as paranoia. I had been traveling for work and had spent too many late nights in hotel rooms, each one blending into the next. I walked toward the elevator, the sound of my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence. I pressed the button, but it didn't light up. I waited, tapping my foot impatiently, but the elevator was still. An inexplicable unease settled over me as I turned to take the stairs instead. With each step I took, the atmosphere grew heavier. I paused at the door to the stairwell, the metal handle cold in my palm. I pushed the door open, and it creaked ominously, almost as if it hadn't been used in ages. The dim light flickered above me, and I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should go back. But I continued down, the stairs spiraling into darkness below. When I reached the first floor, I expected to see the familiar lobby, bustling with guests or at least the night clerk. Instead, there was only darkness. The front desk was empty, and the faint light from the exit sign glowed eerily at the far end of the room. "Hello," I called out, my voice breaking the silence like glass shattering. The echo bounced back at me, mocking my presence. I stepped farther into the lobby, and that's when I heard it, a faint sound, almost like footsteps, echoing from somewhere deeper in the hotel. I turned to look back at the stairs, feeling the weight of something behind me. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to remain calm. I was just tired, I told myself. I needed to get back to my room, to the safety of my bed. I started to retrace my steps, but as I turned the corner, the familiar sight of the corridor greeted me again. I blinked, confusion flooding my mind. How could I be back here? I had just come from there. With mounting dread, I stepped forward again, determined to escape this strange loop. But no matter how many times I walked down that corridor, I ended up right back where I started, as if the hotel itself was playing some cruel game. The flickering lights seemed to dim even further, and that feeling of being watched returned, more intense now, almost suffocating. And then I saw it, a dark figure at the end of the hallway, partially obscured by shadows. It stood there, motionless, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as the reality of my situation sank in. I wasn't alone. I turned to run, panic surging through my veins, but each step felt heavier, the walls seeming to close in around me as I fled down the hallway. No matter where I went, That figure followed me in my mind, lurking just out of sight, growing closer with each passing second. My heart raced as I dashed down the corridor, desperate to escape whatever was lurking in the shadows. Each time I turned a corner, I expected to see the exit, but instead, I found myself back in the same dimly lit hallway, the flickering lights casting twisted shapes along the walls. Panic clawed at my chest, and the air felt thicker, almost suffocating. I tried to remember which way I had come from, but the layout of the hotel began to blur in my mind. Every door I passed looked identical, like some cruel reflection of my growing despair. I reached for my phone, hoping to call the front desk for help, but it displayed no signal, just that little circle spinning, taunting me with its nothingness. "Hello," I called out again, my voice trembling. There was no answer, just the echo of my own fear. I pressed my back against the cool wall, trying to calm my racing heart. This was just a hotel, I told myself. There had to be an explanation, a logical reason for why I felt so disoriented. Taking a deep breath, I turned and walked toward the nearest door, hoping it would lead to a stairwell or an emergency exit. I grasped the handle and pushed it open, only to find myself face to face with another empty room that looked just like my own. The bed was unmade. The curtains swayed slightly as if someone had just left. Confusion washed over me. How was this possible? I took a step back, shaking my head, convinced that I was losing my grip on reality. I forced myself to keep moving, retracing my steps, but no matter how many doors I opened, they all led back to the same corridor. With every attempt to escape, the feeling of being watched intensified. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was following me, lurking just beyond the reach of the light. Each flicker of the overhead bulbs felt like a warning, a prelude to something sinister. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, indistinct yet urgent, drifting through the air. My skin prickled with dread, and I strained to catch the words, but they slipped away like smoke. It felt like the voice was beckoning me, taunting me, daring me to stay. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my breath. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. "It's just your imagination." But the more I tried to convince myself, the more the whispers grew, curling around my thoughts like vines, squeezing the rationality from my mind. Determined to break the cycle, I sprinted back down the hallway. I had to find an exit, something, anything, to escape this madness. I reached the elevator again, slamming the button repeatedly, desperation flooding my veins. But it remained unresponsive, taunting me with its silence. Glancing down the corridor, I noticed the figure again, standing motionless in the shadows. My breath hitched. It hadn't moved closer this time, but its presence was palpable, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I felt paralyzed, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my legs felt heavy, anchored to the floor. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, I turned and bolted in the opposite direction, trying to block out the whispers and the figure. But the corridor stretched endlessly before me, a never-ending maze that refused to let me go. I could feel the walls closing in, the darkness wrapping around me, and I knew I was running out of time. Every door I tried was locked, every corner led me back to the same spot. I could hear the whispers grow louder, intertwining with my thoughts. I was trapped in this hellish loop, and the figure was no longer just a shadow. It was becoming a part of me, an embodiment of my deepest fears. In a moment of desperation, I cried out, "Please! Someone help me!" But the only response was the echo of my own voice, fading into the void. I felt tears stinging my eyes, and I realized then that this hotel was more than just a place to stay. It was a prison, a labyrinth designed to ensnare me, and whatever was watching me from the darkness was relishing my fear. I pressed forward, refusing to give in, hoping against hope that I would find a way out of this nightmare. But deep down, I feared that whatever awaited me in the shadows was only getting closer, ready to claim me as its next victim. I stumbled through the corridor, the whispers now a cacophony swirling in my head. I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to block them out, but their chilling murmurs seeped through, wrapping around my thoughts like a vice. "Leave now," they seemed to chant. "You don't belong here." Desperation clawed at my throat as I fought the urge to scream. The oppressive darkness pressed in around me, and I felt like a moth drawn to a flame, unable to escape the inevitable. I turned back, half hoping to find the lobby and the comforting sight of the front desk, but the familiar path was gone. The hotel was changing, shifting around me like a living thing, and I was at its mercy. I found myself at a door that I hadn't noticed before, its wooden surface marred and weathered, the knob twisted and ancient. Hope surged within me, and I grasped the handle, twisting it open with a loud creak that echoed through the hall. Inside was a dusty old storage room, cluttered with forgotten furniture and broken mirrors. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. It felt safer, hidden from whatever was watching me outside. But as I turned, I was greeted by a sight that made my blood run cold. One of the mirrors stood against the far wall, its surface clouded but reflective enough to catch my image. I walked closer, trying to steady my trembling hands. But when I looked into the glass, I didn't just see myself. There was something behind me, a dark silhouette creeping out from the shadows, just out of focus. My breath caught, and I spun around, but the room was empty. I faced the mirror again, my heart hammering, and the figure was gone. "No," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. "It's just my mind playing tricks." I backed away from the mirror, the cold dread settling in my gut. I had to keep moving, had to find a way out. The storage room felt like a tomb, closing in on me. I turned to leave, but as I stepped back into the corridor, I felt a chill sweep over me. The hallway was darker than before, the flickering lights now barely illuminating the path ahead. I hurried down, trying to find the stairs or another exit, but each turn led me back into the depths of the hotel. Then I heard it again, the soft rustle of footsteps. It was closer this time, echoing against the walls like a heartbeat. My pulse quickened, and I pressed forward, but the sensation of being followed intensified. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure lurking behind me, but nothing was there. Suddenly, a door creaked open, and I froze. A woman stood there, her face pale and gaunt. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she looked as if she had just stepped out of a nightmare. "You have to get out of here," she gasped, her voice shaking. "It's coming for you." "Who? What are you talking about?" I stammered, confusion swirling in my mind. "Listen," she hissed, glancing over her shoulder. "You're trapped. This hotel, it's not safe. I tried to leave, but it won't let me. It wants you too." Before I could respond, she stumbled back into her room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, paralyzed with fear. Had I really seen her, or was she just another figment of this hotel's twisted game? My instincts screamed at me to run, but I felt rooted to the spot, terror coursing through my veins. Taking a deep breath, I moved again, my heart pounding as I pressed forward. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind with chaos. "Leave now. It sees you." I turned a corner and spotted a door marked "Emergency Exit." Hope surged through me. I rushed toward it, adrenaline pushing me forward. But as I reached for the handle, the sound of laughter rang out, echoing through the halls, a sinister, mocking laughter that sent chills racing down my spine. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. It felt like a trap, but it was my only chance. With a burst of courage, I twisted the handle and flung the door open. The stairwell yawned before me, dark and foreboding. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. The laughter faded into the distance, and for a moment I felt safe. But as I descended the stairs, my heart dropped. The walls were lined with mirrors, and every reflection showed the darkness closing in around me. I couldn't escape it. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, and whatever was watching me was getting closer. I could feel it now, a presence, cold and sinister, lurking just beyond the reach of the light. It was time to confront the shadows, but as I took another step down, I realized that the exit I sought might not be what I expected. As I descended the narrow staircase, the air grew colder, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. Each step felt heavier, laden with dread. The mirrors on the walls twisted my reflection, distorting my features and amplifying the panic coursing through my veins. I could feel the shadows creeping closer, their whispers swirling around me, mingling with my thoughts. I reached the bottom of the stairwell and stood before a heavy metal door, its surface cold and unyielding. With trembling hands, I pushed it open, half expecting to find a way out. Instead, I was met with a dimly lit basement that seemed to stretch into infinity. The flickering lights overhead cast eerie shadows that danced along the walls, and the musty smell of decay filled my nostrils. In the center of the room stood an old wooden table, covered in dust and scattered with crumpled papers. It looked like an abandoned storage area, but something about it felt wrong, off-kilter. I took a cautious step forward, drawn by an invisible force, and my heart raced when I noticed an old, worn-out journal lying open on the table. I approached it, my curiosity battling against my instinct to flee. The pages were yellowed and fragile, filled with frantic scrawls. I leaned in closer, my breath hitching in my throat as I read the entries. They detailed the experiences of another guest, someone who had been trapped in this very hotel, just like me. The last entry was hastily written, the ink smudged as if the writer had been in a panic. Asterisk, it watches you, waiting for the right moment. I can feel it closing in. If you hear the laughter, it's already too late. Don't trust anyone. Get out while you still can. Asterisk. My stomach churned as I absorbed the weight of those words. The laughter. I had heard it just moments ago. Was it still in the hotel? Was it waiting for me, just as it had waited for this poor soul? Suddenly, I heard the door creak behind me, and my heart stopped. I spun around, the chill of fear washing over me. The figure stood there, clearer now, stepping into the faint light. It was the woman from before, the one who had warned me. But her face was different now, expressionless, as if she had become a mere vessel for the darkness that surrounded us. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "It won't let you leave." I took a step back, my instincts screaming for me to run, but I was paralyzed by fear. "What do you mean? What is this place?" "It's alive," she whispered, a faint tremor creeping into her voice. "It feeds on our fears, our despair. You must confront it before it consumes you." "Confront what?" I managed to stammer, glancing around the room, the shadows shifting ominously. "The darkness," she said, her gaze drifting to the corners of the basement, where the shadows writhed and pulsed. It takes many forms. It senses your fear, and the more you run, the stronger it becomes. A low growl echoed through the room, and I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. Panic surged within me, and I instinctively took a step back. What do I do? Face it. You must not let it take hold of you, she urged. But her voice faded as the darkness coalesced around her, wrapping her in its grasp. No. Wait. I reached out, but she vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone in the suffocating gloom. My heart raced as the growling grew louder, and I felt a presence looming behind me. Taking a deep breath, I turned to face the darkness. I'm not afraid of you, I shouted, my voice trembling but determined. You can't control me. The shadows recoiled for a moment, and I felt a flicker of hope. But then the darkness surged forward, a tangible force that wrapped around my body, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I gasped, struggling against its grip, and the growl transformed into that sinister laughter. You think you can escape? It mocked, the voice echoing all around me, twisting and distorting. You belong to me now. With every ounce of strength I had, I fought against the darkness, remembering the woman's words. I focused on my fear, confronting it head-on. You're just a trick of my mind, I shouted, pushing back against the darkness that sought to envelop me. In that moment, a bright light flickered within me, igniting my resolve. The shadows recoiled, and I took a step forward. I won't let you win. I could feel the darkness faltering, its grip loosening as I confronted it with my fear. The laughter turned into anguished wails, echoing through the basement as the shadows retreated. I moved toward the exit, heart pounding, feeling lighter with each step. But just as I reached the door, I heard the whispers return, growing louder, swirling in a frenzy. You can't leave. You're ours. I grasped the doorknob, my hand shaking as I twisted it open. Light flooded into the room, pushing back the darkness, and I stepped through, feeling a surge of triumph. I had faced my fears, confronted the nightmare, and I was ready to escape this hotel once and for all. As I crossed the threshold, the shadows screamed, their cries fading behind me. I ran down the hallway, propelled by the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The exit was close now, and I wouldn't stop until I was free. But as I dashed toward the light, I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still lurking, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. I burst through the heavy door and into the bright hallway, gasping for air as my heart pounded in my chest. The hotel felt eerily quiet now, the oppressive darkness lifted, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I darted toward the elevator, my instincts screaming for me to escape as quickly as possible. The soft hum of the lights above was the only sound accompanying my hurried footsteps, but even that felt wrong. I pressed the elevator button repeatedly, willing it to come faster. The metal doors slid open with a soft ding, and I stepped inside, my breath hitching as I anxiously glanced behind me, half expecting the shadows to emerge once more. As the doors closed, I leaned against the cool metal wall, clutching my bag tightly. The elevator descended slowly, and with each passing floor, the silence felt heavier. I could hear the faint echo of my breathing and the rhythmic thud of my heart, but beyond that, there was nothing. I remembered the woman's warning. This place was alive. When the elevator reached the ground floor, the doors opened with a jolt, and I stepped out into the lobby, half expecting to see someone, anyone, who could help me. But the reception desk was empty, the lights flickering overhead creating an unsettling atmosphere. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "Is anyone here?" No response. I hurried to the front doors, each step filled with an urgency I had never felt before. The hotel felt like a tomb, and I was desperate to escape its suffocating grip. As I reached the double doors, I pushed them open, flooding the lobby with the cool night air. But as I stepped outside, a chill ran down my spine. The parking lot was deserted. My car was still there, but everything felt off, as if I had stumbled into a scene from a horror film. The night sky was clear, the stars twinkling down at me, but there was no sign of life anywhere. I rushed to my car, fumbling for my keys as panic gripped me. "Come on, come on," I muttered, my hands shaking. Finally, I found them, inserted them into the ignition, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I felt a flicker of relief wash over me. I put the car in gear and tore out of the parking lot, my heart racing with both fear and adrenaline. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the hotel looming behind me, its dark windows watching me leave. But instead, it seemed to fade into the night, becoming just another shadow on the horizon. Yet, even as I drove, the sense of unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly escaped. The laughter echoed in my mind, and the whispers felt like they were woven into the fabric of the night. I glanced at my phone, the screen lighting up to reveal a string of missed calls from an unknown number. My stomach dropped. The hotel's reception number. "No, no, no," I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. I pressed the phone to my ear and dialed the number back, feeling a knot of dread tightening in my chest. The line rang once, twice, before a distorted voice answered. "Hello." I froze. It was the same voice I had heard on the phone in my room, cold and unnerving. "Leave while you still can," it said, and my blood ran cold. Before I could respond, the line went dead, leaving only silence in its wake. I felt the familiar chill creeping up my spine, the weight of fear pressing down on me again. I slammed my phone onto the passenger seat, gripping the wheel tightly as I focused on the road ahead. I needed to get away, far from that cursed hotel. As I drove through the darkened streets, my mind raced with thoughts. Had I really escaped? Or was this just the beginning of something far worse? As the city lights flickered in the distance, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder one last time, half expecting to see the shadows following me, waiting for their moment to reclaim me. But the night remained still, an unsettling calm settling over everything. I drove on, the uncertainty gnawing at me, knowing that I might never truly be free from the horrors of that night. The darkness had a way of finding you, even when you thought you had escaped. And as I headed toward the safety of the city, a chilling thought crept into my mind. What if the shadows had followed me? What if they were just waiting for the right moment to strike again? Only time would tell.